This was the American policy, the policy of non-intervention, which all the founders basically endorsed, most notably Thomas Jefferson, that subversive, who called for entangling alliances with none in his first inaugural address. This was in part because they were surrounded on all sides by the European powers who were battling it out for world supremacy, with France on one side and the British on the other. So President Jefferson was determined to stay out of it, and not only because of the external danger of the world conflict posed to us, but also because war would destroy the young American republic from within. As James Madison, Jefferson's Secretary of State, put it, quote, "War is in fact the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. In war, a physical force is to be created, and it is the executive will which is to direct it. In war, the public treasuries are to be unlocked, and it is the executive hand which is to dispose of them. In war, the honors and emoluments of office are to be multiplied, and it is the executive patronage under which they are to be enjoyed. It is in war, finally, that laurels are to be gathered, and it is the executive brow they are to encircle," end quote. That thing about the brow and the laurels was a reference to the news that the Corsican corporal Napoleon had crowned himself. He'd actually grabbed the crown from the Pope, or whoever was crowning, and placed it on his own head. He was the former head of the Republic who was becoming a king, an emperor of all the Europeans. Of course, the founders were horrified by this. He had crowned himself and overthrown the French Republic, which was for the founders a negative lesson. There, but for the peace, go we, they thought. While the French were a threat, Jefferson believed that the British were our true long-term enemies, because they had a lot of supporters right here in New England. Indeed, when the War of 1812 broke out, the Federalists in this part of the country, especially in Massachusetts and Connecticut, supported the invaders. Jefferson's bitter evaluation of the Federalists as traitors and closet royalists was confirmed, as was his belief that the main danger was internal, a royalist counter-revolution that would centralize all power in the hands of a new aristocracy, which he feared. The Jeffersonian policy of non-intervention was continued and expanded by President James Monroe and guided under the expert hand of his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. The idea was to create a continental republic swept clear of European colonies, and in this, Adams largely succeeded. Westward expansion, Adams believed, was inevitable, as natural as the flow of a river. But the river must not be allowed to overflow its banks. He believed American dominion beyond the nation's natural boundaries would be a mistake, and he opposed schemes to incorporate Cuba into the Union. He argued against getting involved in Latin America, and he talked President Monroe out of coming out in support of the Greek revolutionaries who had asked for our support. His John Quincy Adams' famous 4th of July address is the manifesto of a distinctively American foreign policy, one that is true to the founders' vision and the spirit of the Constitution. For 50 years, said Adams, America had, quote, respected the independence of other nations while asserting and maintaining her own. She has abstained from interference in the concerns of others, even when conflict has been for principles to which she clings. She has seen that probably for centuries to come, all the contests of the European world will be contests of inveterate power. Whenever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will be her heart, her benedictions, and her prayers. But she does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own." End quote. Immortal principles which we need to remember today. Like Jefferson, Adams believed that liberty could not be exported at the point of a bayonet. The attempt would come at the cost of betraying not only the national interest, but the cause of liberty itself. If America should ever betray and reverse the vision of the founders' foreign policy, warned Adams, quote, "she would involve herself beyond the power of extrication in all the wars of interest and intrigue, of individual avarice, envy, and ambition, which assume the colors and usurp the standard of freedom." End quote. It's amazing how somebody writing that long ago could really focus and evoke what is happening here in America today. Their prescience is astonishing to me. Now, once embarked upon this course, said Adams, the fundamental, quote, "the fundamental maxims of her policy would insensibly change from liberty to force. She might become the dictatress of the world. She would no longer be the ruler of her own spirit." End quote. Adams' words, uttered nearly 2 centuries ago, were prophetic, because if anything describes the tragic and bloody course of the last decade or so of American foreign policy, then surely this is it. We are sunk in the quagmires of Iraq and Afghanistan beyond the powers of extrication, as Adams would put it. And if these conflicts aren't wars of interest and intrigue, of individual avarice, envy, and ambition, then I don't know how else to describe them. George W. Bush did indeed assume the colors and usurp the standard of freedom in proclaiming his misnamed freedom agenda, an agenda which led to the establishment of a theocracy in Iraq and a kleptocracy in Afghanistan. The completion and consolidation of the Continental Project and then the Civil War occupied Americans for the next quarter century. Okay, we're back to Jefferson, Adams, and those guys. During which time, the nation enjoyed a blessed hiatus from foreign crisis and entanglements. When newly elected President Grover Cleveland addressed the nation on March 4th, 1885, he declared that, quote, "the genius of our institutions and the hope for their preservation dictates, quote, scrupulous avoidance of any departure from that foreign policy commended by the history, the traditions, and the prosperity of our republic. It is the policy of independence favored by our position and our power. It is the policy of neutrality, rejecting any share in foreign broils and ambitions upon other continents, and repelling their intrusion here. It is the policy of Monroe and of Washington and of Jefferson, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." End quote. Now, this was not the policy of a particular party or faction. It was the settled policy of a nation. This is what the historian Walter Russell Mead has called the Jeffersonian tradition or theory of foreign relations. And it was a general consensus, not only among the elites, but also among the people at large. The 20th century, however, was to witness many challenges to that consensus, which proved, however, remarkably enduring. As the 19th century faded and the bloody 20th dawned, the siren song of empire sounded throughout the land, and several among our elites answered the call.